now move to a panel talk with these gentlemen. We were supposed to have Dr. Anja Gastner with us on this panel talk too, but she was unfortunately not able to make it to the Zoom call today. So, all right, let's, you're all three back here, perfect, terrific. I'd like to start with you, Ivo. Is there enough knowledge about nature-based solutions and for carbon capture specifically? And if not, who needs to know more, and how do we go about facilitating knowledge, apart from obviously arranging events like this?
Yeah, thanks, Katrina. I think the obvious answer is no. I think historically people have looked at say, gray infrastructure to solve human-related problems, such as building dikes and other forms of sort of man-made structures, and not so much looking at how nature can actually be a solution for challenges related to the food crisis, to the climate crisis, and etc. And I think as we're seeing more and more elevated levels of climate crisis, we need to see how nature can actually work in favor of human development and economic growth. I think Yee Lee was touching on an interesting point. He's saying some of the bottlenecks are related to seeds, capacity building and training. And that is actually for foresters who are already doing it. But if you want to get to the scale of say, forest-related investments that we need, there's this sort of 1 trillion tree planting, the number of people that need to be trained needs to obviously scale. At the same time, as Stephen was highlighting, the challenges are not just in terms of logistics and capacity building, they're also in terms of finance. And I think governments need to realize that beyond the energy transition, we also need below market rate concessional capital in order to crowd in private finance at scale, particularly from institutional investors.
Thank you, Ivo. You mentioned bottlenecks, as Yee Lee talked about before. Yee Lee, could you please elaborate on the two you didn't mention, because there were 4 initially, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Terraformation works on 4 bottlenecks. We talked about seeds. We talked about training capacity. I actually love the direction this panel is moving in because it really highlights, I think, the 3rd and 4th bottlenecks as well, which are early stage forest finance, and then carbon technology and carbon verification and monitoring. Let me touch on these briefly. So for early stage forest finance, Stephen made this great point about the need for blended capital structures to come together. I love the way that Ivo describes these nature-based solutions as really something that humans can give a push to, but then nature should be able to really accelerate and amplify these efforts on her own. And so we view finance exactly as just that early stage impetus. Unfortunately, today, there's a lot of money actually being thrown at forestry solutions, but a lot of it is focused on late stage forestry projects. Like if you already have a forest at scale, it's hundreds of thousands of hectares, you're already producing carbon credits for sale, then sure, you can go talk to some of these companies that are buying carbon credits and be able to participate in an RFP, or you'd be able to participate in a forestry bond, sort of a late stage finance kind of a vehicle. Unfortunately, if you are a 5-person team and you just got, title access to 50,000 hectares, and you're trying to figure out how do I start this brand new forest project, there's nobody that's going to underwrite you. You can't go to a local bank somewhere and say like, hey, I want to start a forest, please give me a loan or something like that. Like that's just that source of capital just doesn't exist. And so the blended capital structures that Stephen was talking about are really critical to creating risk tolerant pools of early stage finance that will be able to take a brand new, pardon the pun here, a seed stage forest project and to help it grow into something that could become a carbon project. The analogy that I like to think about here is really from Silicon Valley. Pardon the analogy, because I am a Silicon Valley creature. I'm a tech person, but in tech startups, we've really had this remarkable evolution over the last 30 or 40 years of many different stages of finance. And so now there's specialists, investors who just focus on early stage tech projects, seeding them, getting them off the ground. They're called angel investors or seed funds sometimes. That's the class of capital that we need for forests. And so really excited to work with Bankers Without Boundaries on a first sort of draft of how these kinds of finance vehicles can come together. So that's the third bottleneck. If we can unblock that, that'll get many more projects going. As Stephen and Ivo have both mentioned, carbon is a really important aspect of how forests can actually generate economic value, not only for investors, but also, of course, importantly for the local landowners and for the local project managers. Carbon standards today are really expensive to audit and to verify. They very often require sending human beings to go walk through or drive through a forest and sample, count trees, measure the girth of trees, and try to estimate how much carbon is in the trunks. But all of that is very labor intensive. It's very expensive. It's done very periodically, usually on a 3 to 5 year rotating basis. And so if the world had better carbon verification technologies and better carbon standards that could actually take all of the carbon that this entire forest ecosystem is sequestering, like not just the carbon that's in the trunks of the trees, but the carbon that all the living animals and flora and fauna above ground and below ground, if we're able to capture all of that carbon value and monitor it remotely, that would be a huge unlock for the world as well.
Thank you very much, Yee Lee. I see we have Patrick Chiari from Kenya with us, but before I turn to you, Patrick, I'd just like to get a reflection from Stephen on how has your report been received by bankers and other people in the finance sector?
Thanks, Katrina. I think there's a huge amount of interest, as Yee highlighted. There's appetite for looking at that seed capital, horrible pun, but it works. And also a lot of interest from corporates in terms of that offset market. As I said, that has some contentious natures to it. You've got to be careful there isn't virtue signaling here or greenwashing, as some might describe it. But if you put capital to work in afforestation as a corporate, you get the trees planted, they grow, then you're making a significant carbon emissions impact in a positive sense. And so I think that part of the financing is something that people are interested in. But there is a broad interest right across the capital spectrum from DFIs, equity investors, and corporates in this asset class because they can see the attraction both from a financial perspective and from a climate perspective.
Excellent, Stephen. So now we turn to Kenya, to Nairobi, to Patrick Chiari, who's head of the representation here in Nairobi. So Patrick, what reflections do we have from your end at what you heard in this segment? I think we lost the sound from Patrick here.
Hello,
now we hear you. Great.
How are you?
Fine. We can hear you now, Patrick.
Okay. We are at Mount Kenya University, and we are happy for this day, and we are looking forward to engage more regarding the event of today. And, we have university students from various university and tertiary institutions in Thika in Kenya. We are looking forward and we are happy for that.
So Patrick, when you listened now to Yee Lee and to Ivo and to Stephen, are there any immediate reflections that you'd like to share personally or from the students present in the studio in Nairobi?
Again?
Would you like to share any reflections now before we end this panel on what has been spoken earlier in this segment?
Yeah, we are looking forward for more engagement, and we are expecting more media coverage to be here, and we think they will broadcast our event today all over.
Thank you, Patrick. And do you have any local examples of what has just been mentioned of reforesting and seed structure in your region?
Yeah, of course we have a lot, but we are planning to make our planet more better than how it is now. Mm-hmm.
So there is need for more, but there is things happening in Kenya and in your region of Africa that is promising.
Yeah, true.
Excellent. So we'll be getting back to Mount Kenya University and to Patrick Chiari and his team shortly. Thank you very much, Ivo, for joining us, and thank you very much, Yee Lee, and thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you, Patrick.